Another suspect sought. French police say they're seeking a second fugitive directly involved in the Paris attacks. Governors go on record. More than 24 oppose a plan to resettle Syrian refugees in America. Catholic Voters Guide. U.S. bishops approve updates to their guide for voting in the 2016 election. And mercy abounds, preparing for the Jubilee Year of Mercy, which begins in just 3 weeks. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, November 17th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. As France continues pounding ISIS with airstrikes in Syria, there is a worldwide search for those responsible for Friday's attacks in Paris. The hunt is on for 26-year-old Salah Abdeslam, one of the suspected terrorists in Friday's attack in Paris. His brother Ibrahim blew himself up during the attacks that left 129 dead. Their family tells CNN they had no idea the two had become radicalized.
But my brother, who has participated in this terrorist attack, was probably psychologically ready to commit such an act.
The worldwide search continues as coalition fighters intensify airstrikes against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. French President François Hollande tells the world France won't back down.
Thought of weakening the French passion for receiving the whole world. They have already lost that fight.
Russia is also increasing its military response, doubling the number of airstrikes in Syria. It's part of the stern message Vladimir Putin has for ISIS after confirming it was a bomb that brought down a Russian jetliner over Egypt October 31st. ISIS has taken credit. In the U.S., a political battle is brewing over President Obama's plan to increase the number of refugees allowed in America. And after those Paris attacks, at least 27 governors are now on record opposing the Obama administration's plan to resettle 10,000 Syrians in the U.S. next year. All but one of those governors are Republican. Opposition exploded after it was revealed at least one suspect in the Paris attacks may have slipped into Europe posing as a Syrian refugee. Only the federal government has legal authority to limit or control immigration based on long-standing law and the U.S. Constitution. But individual states can limit or deny services to refugee populations. Admitting Syrian refugees to the U.S. has also become a polarizing issue on Capitol Hill. Wyatt Goolsby is there with that story tonight.
Brian, House Speaker Paul Ryan is calling for a pause in the nation's Syrian refugee resettlement program. He and most House Republicans are worried terrorists will try to enter the United States disguised as refugees. But Speaker Ryan is already being met with opposition from Democrats.
Our nation has always been welcoming, but we cannot let terrorists take advantage of our compassion. This is a moment where it's better to be safe than to be sorry.
Speaker Paul Ryan says it's time for Congress to take action against the president's plan to resettle thousands of Syrian refugees in the U.S.
The responsible thing is to take a pause in this particular aspect of this refugee program in order to verify that terrorists are not trying to infiltrate the refugee population.
But not everyone agrees with the move to block refugees.
Some 750,000 refugees have come in since 9/11 into this country, and not a one has ever faced arrest for terrorism.
Today, House Democrats responded to Ryan, saying refugees, especially Syrians, are extensively vetted. The debate on Capitol Hill extends to the presidential campaign trail. Most GOP candidates are against accepting Syrian refugees.
I will oppose them coming. We should be relocating them in the region.
I do not believe that we should be bringing them here.
President Obama made his stance clear Monday, saying turning away refugees is not the answer.
We do not close our hearts to these victims of such violence and somehow start equating the issue of refugees with the issue of terrorism.
Earlier today, Republicans grilled Attorney General Loretta Lynch about the White House's refugee plans. During a House committee, Lynch said that the program itself has a robust screening process that's more stringent than in Europe. She also says that it is the top priority of the Justice Department to protect the U.S. from terrorists. Brian?
Thank you. Wyatt Goolsby on Capitol Hill tonight. Danielle, Pletka focuses on foreign and defense policy with the American Enterprise Institute. Danielle, is the campaign against ISIS on track to degrade or destroy this enemy?
No, absolutely not. I fail to understand why the president keeps insisting that it is. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest on the ground that ISIS is being degraded, let alone destroyed.
In your opinion, what is the solution to this carnage? How can we begin to move to an end?
Well, you know, a big part of the challenge here is having a strategy. Right now, what we have is a series of tactics in place that are responsive to things that happen on the ground. The president hasn't decided what the end game he wants is, and he hasn't decided what a strategy to get there is. Without those two elements, it's very hard to reckon out what we should be doing, because it's not enough to simply degrade and destroy ISIS. Something has to be there to replace it as well.
You recently had an opportunity to interview Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. What did he share with you about this situation in that region?
It was very interesting to me. Prime Minister Netanyahu is a very intelligent man, well-spoken and very decisive. So I asked him about the implications of Syria for Israel. And in a rather long and roundabout way, he basically said to me, I don't know what the right outcome is in Syria, because right now we have two bad options, and so I'm keeping my nose out of it.
How interesting. What about those who want to blame all of this bloodshed on Islam in general and or the Syrian people?
I think it has been the most deplorable turn in the American national debate to see how the Syrians, who are first and foremost the victims of both ISIS and the Assad regime, the victims not just in terms of bombing, which is one thing, but in terms of a systematized campaign of torture, of rape, and of murder. They are the premier victims of what is going on in Syria. So to suggest that somehow they are the vanguard of terrorism looking to come to either America or Europe is really a shame.
From the American Enterprise Institute, Danielle Pletka, thank you for your input tonight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Other stories. Our EWTN News Nightly team is working in today's world. U.S. bishops meeting in Baltimore approve an updated guide for Catholic voters. Catherine Szeltner is in Baltimore tonight with that story. Catherine?
Brian, bishops say the Faithful Citizenship Guide is a tool for Catholics to form their conscience before voting. It is not an endorsement of any candidate or political party. The guide is traditionally reissued the year before every presidential election, so bishops aren't seen as partisan. Faithful Citizenship says a Catholic cannot vote for a candidate who votes in favor of abortion, and candidates should fight to strengthen marriage. Today, some bishops claim the document is outdated because it doesn't emphasize care for the environment and efforts to combat poverty. The vice president of the U.S. bishops was in charge of revisions to Faithful Citizenship. He strongly defends the guide.
And I think we have a useful document that does recognize newness that has come with Pope Francis. It does, however, also indicate continuity. It's good to know what some of the issues were and are that have been with us for some years.
D.C.'s Cardinal Donald Wuerl says the Faithful Citizenship Guide won't please everyone, but the bishops can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The bishops also passed a formal statement responding to the pornography crisis. It raises awareness about the negative impact pornography has on the family and on society. The document also provides resources for people with that particular struggle. Brian?
Catherine Szeltner with the bishops in Baltimore tonight. Thank you, Catherine. With the Islamic State threatening the United States, GOP presidential candidate John Kasich says the U.S. must act now. He's toughened his stance and now favors sending in ground troops. Jason Calvi reports.
The founding NATO treaty says an attack on one ally is an attack on all.
Friday's attacks were an act of war by ISIS on France, and therefore they were an attack on America and every other NATO member state.
Governor Kasich says U.S. airstrikes are not enough. To defeat ISIS, he says the U.S. should arm the Kurdish forces fighting ISIS.
That's just one of the many foreign policy proposals laid out by Governor Kasich today here at the National Press Club in Washington.
He said the U.S. needs to be tougher in the face of Chinese and Russian aggression, but he devoted much of his time to ISIS.
We believe that life has value and meaning. They see no value, even in their own lives.
Defeating ISIS will take more than boots on the ground. It requires a war of ideas, according to the Ohio governor.
The Jewish and Christian traditions of Western civilization need to be expressed in ways that give people hope and understanding and passion and understand that their lives make a difference.
Kasich also says he would delay allowing Syrian refugees into the country.
Right now, until we get a handle on where we are, we need to stop. And once we have a rational program and we can determine who it is that's coming, then it's another story.
Kasich is currently middle of the GOP pack in the polls. Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops joins us from Baltimore. And we go to Rome, where the final plans are coming together for the Jubilee Year of Mercy. Today, November 17th, is the feast of St. Elizabeth of Hungary. She helped the poor and sick, often angering her royal husband. Food for the poor, hidden in her cloak, miraculously turned to roses when he searched her. Elizabeth died in 1231. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Louisville Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, the president of the USCCB, joining us from Baltimore. Archbishop, Your Excellency, how is the narrowing of religious freedom challenging the church today?
Well, Brian, you raise a great question that I think in people's minds, too often, they begin to think of religious freedom as simply a right to worship for an hour or an hour and 15 minutes on Sunday or Friday, Saturday, depending on your faith. What it is, though, is it's changing the whole complex of it. Remember, our religion calls us to act. It calls us to live our life when we leave church. And so the narrowing of religious freedom is not only not a good thing for the person of faith, it's not a good thing for the nation, because voices of faith and people, faith in action, have built this great nation. And we need to bring our faith with us. It motivates us to serve others and to seek the common good. So it really is something worth talking about and also worth defending. And I'm glad you asked me about it.
Did that topic come up when you met with President Obama recently? And can you share any of that conversation?
Yeah, the meeting with President Obama was, of course, at his request. We met for about 50 minutes, and I was grateful for it. It was extremely civil and cordial. We want to build on all the goodwill that has come from Pope Francis's visit, and we talked about some beautiful things and important things to reach out to help those most in need. You're right, though, Brian, that one of the areas that I introduced also was this notion that as people of faith and conscience, as well as our Catholic institutions and other religious institutions within the United States, we need to be able to serve other people in a way that's consistent with our faith. And I made that point to President Obama. I felt that it was very, very important for us to maintain that dialogue. And, he and I both know, for instance, one of the most high visible issues has to do with the Supreme Court taking on the HHS mandate. And Little Sisters of the Poor and others, he knows and I know, are not wanting to sue anybody. They simply want to serve. So it did come up for conversation, and we know that that the Supreme Court's work is going to be very important in the coming months.
Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, thank you for joining us from your busy schedule at the Bishops' Conference there in Baltimore. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be with you.
In just 3 weeks, the Holy Father inaugurates the Year of Mercy. The Jubilee, also called a Holy Year, opens December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. It closes in 2016 on the Feast of Christ the King, exactly 1 year from this coming Friday. It's good to have Father Gino Silva with the Vatican Council that's in charge of the Year of Mercy joining us from Rome. Father Gino, the Year of Mercy, the Jubilee year, begins in just a few weeks on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. What's unique about this year? What are some of the highlights?
Well, thank you, Brian. There are a lot of things about this Jubilee of Mercy that really mark this Holy Year as different than any other Holy Year celebrated in the history of the Church. For one, Pope Francis was very clear when he announced the Jubilee of Mercy that he wanted it celebrated not only here in Rome, but also in the local particular churches all around the world. And to this end, he's invited every bishop to select a particular holy door in their own diocese, whether it's a cathedral or whether a special pilgrimage shrine, so that if people can't come to Rome, they can still make that pilgrimage walk through a holy door in their local diocese. So that is something that's really unique about this Jubilee of Mercy.
Briefly explain the symbolism of the Holy Door of Mercy.
Well, the Holy Door, the whole symbolism and the image goes back to Jesus in his own words, where he says that I am the door. And the beautiful symbolism of the Holy Door is that when we make a pilgrimage through it, we're really showing our desire to step out of the darkness of sin that we might fall under into the beauty and the light and the love of Christ and his mercy. So it's so symbolic of conversion, of a deepening of faith, of a walking away from darkness into the light.
And what kind of special graces can we receive participating in the Jubilee Year of Mercy?
Well, there's so many different graces that by people taking this opportunity in the Jubilee of Mercy, for one, what we're inviting people to do is to take advantage of the sacrament of penance and reconciliation, to come home to the great sacrament of God's mercy. And so for this reason, the Holy Father is sending out around the world missionaries of mercy, priests who have been selected and given the faculties by the Holy Father to forgive those sins which are reserved to the Holy See. And again, the Holy Father's desire is that people come home to the sacrament of God's mercy, the sacrament of reconciliation. And so this is just one of the ways to receive that sacramental grace offered in a special way. Of course, always offered in the Church, but in a special way during the Jubilee of Mercy.
What a wonderful opportunity for us as Catholics. Father Gino Silva, thank you for joining us from Rome tonight.
Well, thank you very much.
Up next, New Hampshire Right to Life reacts to the Supreme Court's refusal to hear a critical case. And we discuss the early release of prisoners back into society. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. New Hampshire Right to Life is reacting after the Supreme Court declines to take up its bid to force Planned Parenthood to disclose records related to a federal grant. The group objects to a $1.3 million contract Health and Human Services awarded Planned Parenthood in 2011. It says that grant was awarded without going through state approval or standard protocols. New Hampshire had also decided not to fund Planned Parenthood that year. Attorney Michael Tierney, representing New Hampshire Right to Life, says Americans deserve to know if their tax money is being funneled to groups that are misusing it. Michael Tierney is Skyping with us from Manchester, New Hampshire. Michael, what records are New Hampshire Right to Life seeking and why?
In this federal FOIA case, it was about the federal government's improper grant of $1.3 million to Planned Parenthood of Northern New England in 2011. We want to know why that money was given so that we can prevent the government from giving more money to Planned Parenthood in the future.
So now that the Supreme Court will not hear your case, is there any other legal recourse?
Yes, Exemption 4 under FOIA is under the federal right to know law. We currently have a case pending before the New Hampshire Supreme Court under the New Hampshire right to know law, which has been interpreted to be broader so that taxpayers can know how the government is spending their money, and in particular, in our case, how the government is improperly subsidizing abortion providers.
Don't you think this case is really of interest to a lot of states that are deciding not to fund Planned Parenthood, because New Hampshire made that decision and yet this grant was made anyway?
Correct. That this is of national consequence. There's over $500 million that is given to Planned Parenthood every year just from the federal government, and approximately another $500 million that is given by about 40 different states every year. So we're talking about $1 billion every year, and if the people and if the elected representatives knew where this money was going to, I'm confident that these grants would be greatly decreased, if not eliminated altogether.
So what is your intent with this case? What do you want to accomplish?
Well, in all of the right to know cases that have been going, we have been trying to expose how the government has been funding the abortion clinics in order to stop the funding of the abortion clinics, and to find out how the clinics are being regulated so we can make sure that the abortion clinics are being regulated in the same way as any hospital or any healthcare clinic is being regulated.
Michael Tierney, representing New Hampshire Right to Life. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Congress is considering a bill to cut prison sentences for nonviolent drug offenders. The bill is a priority of the Obama administration. 4,300 inmates were released earlier this month. Tens of thousands are expected to benefit from changes to drug sentencing made last year. And President Obama wants Congress to prohibit the government and its contractors from asking about criminal histories on job applications. Star Parker is back with us, founder and president of CURE, Center for Urban Renewal and Education. It's good to see you again, Star.
It's good to be with you.
Should nonviolent drug offenders see their sentences cut?
Well, that's a yes or no question, and if I were to have to pick one or the other, I would say yes. And the reason I would say yes is because although this is a very complicated situation, number one, the drug offenders are a very small part of the population in our prisons, and as a Christian, we need to be concerned about offering opportunities a second chance. So while they try to do everything here in D.C. Comprehensively, this is something that we should weigh in on, and in fact, many organizations on the right are a part of what this should look like over time.
So many of those released from jails or prisons return. How can we break that cycle of incarceration?
Well, that's the bigger question for even looking at the drug offenders. Family breakdown is why we have this scenario. This is why we have 2 million people in our prisons. The common denominator between all of them is 95% of the men in our larger system don't have a relationship with their father. 70% of the young guys that are in our criminal justice system have no relationship with their father. When you have a society like ours today, to where 48% of children are being born into homes that the mother has never married, this is complicated for us. We have to revisit questions of morality, family building, getting rid of this new definition of marriage, and encouraging society to marry again before producing children and building healthy lives for those children.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit and look at the tension, the racial tension on some campuses, including the University of Missouri. What do you make of what's going on?
Well, one philosopher said under the impact of moral relativism, you have mob rule. And what we're looking at now are all of our institutions collapsing and mob rule. I don't know that the students even know what they're looking for. They just know something has broken down. And what has broken down are our traditions. We are in a chaos community right now, and they're expressing this anger toward any type of institution or any type of uniform, any type of symbol of rule of law. So they must be governed. We cannot allow for this fuel to continue to create fires across our campuses.
Do you agree with the way it's being handled, especially at Missouri?
Absolutely not. When any time you give in to children, I mean, this would be like giving it to 2-year-olds. They get worse. When you start accompanying them with candy, they get fat and worse. No, you need to say, these are the rules. All right, you want to be on this university campus, these are the rules. If you have a challenge, you bring it to us and let's resolve this challenge. But absolutely destroying education for others because you are having a temper tantrum is not acceptable behavior.
The new interim president at Missouri, though, is an African-American, one of the first to graduate from their law school. Could that not help the situation?
Depends on what they allow him to do, because African-American or not, there is this insistence from this hard left, this George Soros-funded hard left, that they don't care what color you are, they just wonder if your worldview is liberal. And if his worldview is not, he's going to have problems. It's not about ethnicity at that point. It's about, are you going to allow us to express ourselves? And if he says no, he may not last.
Oh, interesting. Star Parker with CURE. Thanks for being with us, Star.
Welcome.
We appreciate seeing you. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team and our guests, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.